Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Applied Finance Society's podcast, FinTalk. I'm your host, Shreya. Today's episode marks the launch of our brand new series, Finance with Her. This series shines a spotlight on the women shaping Australia's financial future, bringing you thoughtful conversations with economists, investors, and professionals making waves in the industry. In this first episode, we're diving into Australia's current economic outlook, what's happening globally, and how innovation is reshaping the way we think about finance. We'll explore everything from interest rates and inflation to CBDCs, AI, and future shifts in the job market. To help us unpack all of this, I'm joined by Diana Mousina, Deputy Chief Economist at AMP. Diana is one of Australia's most respected voices in economic commentary. She frequently appears in the media, breaks down complex financial issues with clarity, and brings sharp insight to both domestic and global trends. Diana, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on FinTalk.
Thank you, Shreya. Thanks for having me on.
It is such a pleasure to have you here, Diana. So just to get the ball rolling, let's go back to where everything started. What inspired you to get into economics, and why do you think economics makes such a rewarding field for young people entering the workforce today?
So I don't really have anything interesting about why I first started getting into economics. To be honest, it was just something that I was naturally good at in high school. So I did take economics in year 11 and 12. I was lucky enough that my school offered it. And we actually had a pretty big class of economics students. I went to a Catholic girls' school. We had about 30 kids in economics, which was quite a lot, given that I know that the class at the moment at the same school has about 5 girls in it. I was always good at maths and I liked it, and I think there is definitely quite a good relationship between maths and economics. I know that some people say there's too much mathematics involved in economics, but you sort of have to have some basic maths understanding to understand, how the charts move and try when you're trying to manipulate data. In saying that, though, I think communication is also really important in economics because of the way that you write, and also if you want to go into the field, then how you present and talk to people. And then following that, I decided to do commerce and economics when I went into uni, and then I stumbled into the job of an economist basically after that.
Yes, and obviously you've worked at some very well-known institutions, starting at Combank and now you're at AMP. Could you maybe walk us through that journey and what those transitions kind of looked like for you?
So when I finished uni, when I was at uni, I basically just applied for any grad positions that I could get, anything related to finance, economics, business. I was applying everywhere and no one really gave me any guidance what to do. I didn't really have anyone to tell me what I should be applying for. I just sort of went about, did it myself. I didn't go to a careers counsellor or anything like that. I just figured it out. And I remember really clearly applying for these grad jobs, waiting, for the responses, because there are so many different stages, the psychometric testing, the different levels of assessment that you have to do. And I remember there was this forum called Whirlpool. I mean, now I guess it's turned into Reddit. But at the time, it was a Whirlpool forum. And I remember just like frenzying every single day, seeing if people had been contacted by the assessment centre people. And then I kind of got a guide as to if I would be contacted and what to expect in the assessment centre. So it was a really stressful time. But I basically applied for everything and was lucky enough to get a job at the Commonwealth Bank. And the graduate program was quite broad there in institutional banking. And I spent about 5 years at Commonwealth Bank, and then I was looking for a bit of a change to do something different. And the job at AMP came up, and it was buy side, but still an economist. So CBA was technically sort of sell side economics, as you would classically or technically say it. And the role at AMP was a little bit broader and working within the asset classes, which I thought sounded really interesting. And that's why I moved to AMP.
Mm-hmm. And just drawing from your experience across these different institutions, what are some of the key lessons or insights that have stayed with you over time?
I think you have to be really passionate about what you want to do and sort of pursue that passion. I mean, I knew that I always liked economics and I sort of wanted to pursue that. I think you have to stand up for what you want to do as well. When I was in the grad program at CBA, I was placed into some rotations that I didn't want to do. And I sort of tried to push back against that, which at the time didn't really go down that well. And I sort of understand why, because I've been on the other side being like a grad coordinator, and it's sort of really annoying when graduates are saying, well, I want to go into this field, I don't want to do that rotation. I really understand the frustration with that, but at the same time, I'm so happy that I sort of pursued what I really wanted to do, because otherwise I probably wouldn't be an economist. I probably would have done something else that was interesting, or maybe I would have stumbled into it later. But I think you have to stand up for what you want to do and try and figure it out as best you can. I mean, it's obviously hard to completely map out your career journey. That's impossible to do, because new roles come up, things that you want to do change, businesses change, your personal life changes, if you want to have a family and whatever. So you have to be flexible about that, but trying to stand up for what you want to do in the next few years, I think, is really important, and trying to figure that out as much as you can.
Okay, so many, if not most of our listeners are still studying, or they're just starting out. What advice would you offer to those very early in their careers? And would you say that there are certain skills that have helped you, maybe ones that aren't talked about more often?
I think it's really important to work while you're at uni. So it's basically impossible to get a graduate position, to get an entry-level position, if you haven't had any work experience. And now the work experience needs to be related to what you want to do. So if you want to come and work at a funds management company like AMP or another fund manager, you need to have some sort of finance experience. Like, you can't just be doing something completely random and then expect that you're going to get into the sector that you want to work in. I mean, of course, there are different skills that are important, like interpersonal skills and communication skills, leadership. That's all really nice, but at the end of the day, companies are looking for you to be able to do something when you start. And for like examples with us, when we've had graduates in our team that haven't had an economics background, I've really struggled with them because they don't have the background understanding, and it's really hard for them to do things initially. It creates it's a time drain for me trying to teach them, and they don't get the most out of it either. And then they usually end up not probably enjoying their rotation as much as they would have had. So I think that getting real world experience is extremely important. And also it teaches you good skills about time management in uni when you have competing priorities. It's a good way for you to make and save money, or to spend it, or do whatever it is that you want to do with it. And then it helps you to get a job when you finish uni. Yes, that is such a valuable point about actually getting out there and building real world experience. It is one thing to learn theory, but applying it in practice really shapes how you think and work. And I imagine that kind of hands on experience also changes the way you approach problems, especially when it comes to analyzing information. Which actually brings me to something that I've been curious about. Whether it's in your work or even for students analyzing data, we're working with such huge amounts of information that can be overwhelming oftentimes. And with so much data coming in all the time these days, how do you personally strike a balance between digging into those numbers versus trusting your own judgment? It's a good question, and it's very hard to answer, actually. And I feel like we have become so data driven in the last few years because it's so easy to download data now, whether it's Bloomberg, or I use Bloomberg, I use Macrobond, whether it's Reuters or FactSet. There are so many options now to download data. Most of the government agencies have a data source that you can download things from. So it depends where you're working. So in markets, you sort of know what's important, and you sort of have to track the most important indicators. So labor market, inflation. Of course, you're going to always be looking at those things. Depends what's also topical at the time. For example, tariffs. Like, I just downloaded a chart on customs duties coming into the US at the moment. So it changes depending on what's topical and what's important. And you sort of just, I guess you just sort of figure it out. There is a lot of sifting through different data sets, and you find out some things are not a good indicator, that they're not a good leading indicator, or you sort of know that the data is rubbish if you know that it has quality issues, or it just looks strange. But it's just a little bit of trial and error, I guess, of knowing what's important at the time. Okay, so shifting gears a little, we also wanted to tap into your expertise as an economist and look ahead to some of the big structural changes shaping the world. From digital currencies to AI, there is a lot happening right now.
that could fundamentally change how we live, work, and manage money. So let's start with something that's been making headlines for a while. Cryptocurrency adoption might have slowed down a bit, but central banks seem to be pressing ahead with digital currencies. Do you think CBDCs are actually going to go mainstream in the next few years?
I guess define the next few years. I mean, I do think that they're going to have a role in the future. Will they basically replace currency as we know it? To be honest, I'm not sure. I think that they will definitely play a role in the future in the next 15 to 20 years, not in the next 5 years though. But I'm not sure that they're going to actually replace our currency. They could potentially provide room for the US dollar to become less of a global base currency for the world. That's a potential that some of the BRICS countries have been talking about. But I think it's more of a 15-year story.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like there's obviously a lot of potential, but also a lot to work out in terms of accessibility for certain countries, and for people to trust, as well as the infrastructure. And
That's why young people like you are gonna figure it out for the future.
yeah. And looking just beyond the technology itself, do you think digital assets could play a real role in improving financial inclusion, or are there still too many barriers to reach the people who need it the most?
I think we've made pretty good strides in financial inclusion now. I mean, even if you look at developing countries, they're actually using less cash at the moment. Everything is digital. They're sort of more digital than even developed countries like Australia because of the access for people that may not have cash. There can be less fraud as well. There's less things on the black market. So I think in terms of financial inclusion, we've already done that pretty well. And most of the world, a very large share of it now owns a smartphone. And I think that the smartphones have probably paved the way for that financial inclusion. I mean, there's a difference between financial inclusion and financial literacy, which I think has a massive room to grow. But I think we've done a pretty good job in financial inclusion.
Okay, and now moving on to AI, which is a very hot topic right now. It's reshaping industries across the board, and finance is definitely one of them. Do you think the workforce is ready for the scale of change that AI and automation are bringing in?
I think it will be a slower change than what a lot of people may be expecting. I haven't seen any job losses related to AI yet. Most companies just seem to be adopting it alongside their workforce, and some companies have also made quite large investments into automation or artificial intelligence and their technology overall. But it seems to be working alongside humans as humans still train AI tools because we clearly know that the AI tools that we have right now are not able to replace some human workforce. We've already seen a long-term decline in the non-routine, in routine types of jobs. So initially, manufacturing processes related to robotics and automation replaced routine jobs, for example, at manufacturing facilities. And the problem is that now people are worried that AI is going to replace the non-routine cognitive jobs, not just manual. But I think it's going to be a long-term story. The problem is if people don't have the skills to sort of to be able to work with AI in the future, I probably see that as the biggest risk. Are we training uni students and the workforce enough in tertiary education or in some sort of trade to work with AI? That's probably more of a longer term issue. But in the short term, I don't think that AI is replacing any sort of white collar types of jobs at the moment.
Yeah, and that really goes to the heart of where things are going, not just with the tech itself, but also how we adapt around it. And I guess that kind of leads to the bigger question um, of whether you think AI will ultimately create more jobs than it displaces, or is there a real concern that we could see lasting structural unemployment in some sectors?
Sectors change over time. I mean, if you look at manufacturing 50 years ago in Australia or the US, it was a much larger share of the economy, 20-25% of GDP, and now it's declined to less than 10% in most major countries. This is just what happens. Sectors change over time, mostly because of the impact of globalization over time that we've seen this big decline in manufacturing in developed countries to be offset with higher manufacturing in developing and emerging countries. That's quite normal. So sectors are going to change over time, for sure. There is no doubt about that because of the impact of AI. But fundamentally, do I think that the unemployment rate is going to be higher for the long term because of AI? No. I think it's going to create some productivity growth, but GDP growth continues to climb up over time. I mean, that's what usually tends to happen. If you look at any major improvement in the world, I've got a really good chart on this. Basically, it has all the different improvements in the world that we've had in the past 100 years. You know, the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, that was before that, computers, smartphones, the internet. And what we can see is that productivity growth generally tends to increase over time, which increases people's incomes and increases growth as well. I think that that's what's likely to happen. We're going to continue on that path to higher productivity growth and higher GDP growth. Not to say that there's not going to be displacement or that some sectors are not going to struggle or there's going to be short-term pockets of unemployment potentially, but we are fundamentally still a services-based economy, and as more developed countries become more services driven or emerging and developing countries become developed nations and services becomes a large share of their population, well, the jobs growth will flow to services based things, healthcare, social assistance, community care, everything that's basically related to helping people.
All right. And to wrap up this episode on a forward looking note, if you had to pick one major economic shift, whether it's technology, policy, or a structural trend that you think will define the next decade, what would it be?
So I guess in the decade prior to COVID, we went through a period of very low interest rates, low inflation, low bond yields, and then we've had this displacement in growth over the past 5 years since COVID. But I think that the next 10 years is going to be an era that's going to see higher interest rates compared to what we've been used to. I think let's forget about what happened in the pandemic. Higher interest rates compared to the decade before the pandemic, which basically means that bond yields are going to remain quite elevated. So the cost of borrowing is going to remain elevated. We're going to see more pockets of geopolitical strength. So basically moving from a unipolar world where the US was dominant to multipolar. So many spheres of influence, China being quite dominant, India being dominant, Russia, Iran, and the BRICS countries having their own block that's probably a little bit stronger compared to where it was, and the US becoming more internally focused, having more of an internal foreign policy agenda, I'd say. I think that changes how the world works together because the many spheres of influence and the multipolar world means that we are going to get more geopolitical shocks and more volatility in things like share markets. So in the 10 years before COVID, we had quite a calm period where shares had this, well, we went through obviously periods of ups and downs, but low interest rates generally fueled higher asset prices, particularly for things like property and infrastructure. Whereas the next 10 years, I think we're going to see more of a shift away from high growth in the real assets like property and infrastructure, and equities will have their up and down periods. But generally, higher interest rates and higher inflation means that the growth that you're going to get from assets is not going to be as high as what we've been used to. And these many spheres of influence, I think, will also just increase the geopolitical risk that we have and the volatility in markets.
Okay, and that's a wrap on today's episode. Diana, thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. It's always a pleasure to hear your thoughts on where the economy is heading, both here in Australia and around the world. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Thank you for listening, and I think it's good that you're taking the time to build up your financial literacy and your understanding, even though you're still young and uni students. But I think it's good to be on top of what's going on in the world.
Yes, thank you so much. And finally, to all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of FinTalk. We hope this conversation has given you something to think about and maybe even inspired your own curiosity about the future of finance. We'll be back with more conversations very soon, and until then, take care, and we hope to see you in our next episode. This episode features the personal views and opinions of our guests. The conversation is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Please seek professional guidance before making any financial decisions.